Good day. Welcome to this Zoom lecture. My name is Adedoyin Teriba. I teach the history of modern and contemporary architecture and urbanism here at VASA in both the arts department as well as the program of urban studies. And it's a pure pleasure and honor for me to deliver this lecture to you. Before going ahead with the lecture, I want to ruminate a little bit on the phrase architectural history. As the name implies, architectural history is about the history of architecture, the history of buildings. It purports to show that history of peoples, of cultures, does not only consist in documents, but that things like buildings and material culture in general are adequate sources through which one can construct and understand history. It is usually my strategy to project a building in the background. So that is what you see. You see a particular building in my background. This building will be the focus of the lecture today. And it's my practice to give a foretaste in the beginning by showing the picture of the building at large in the background. So more about that. It's a tease, if you will, into the lecture. And I will begin the lecture right now. As you can see, I've chosen as my title, Architecture Embodying Opposites, Freedom and Slavery in Southwest Colonial Nigeria. The title declares my contention that architecture can embody opposites, if you will, in this case, freedom and slavery. I think it's incumbent upon me to say that architecture, or suggest rather, that architecture does not necessarily have to communicate one thing, that there are various meanings that can be construed from architecture, and I will explore how freedom, the idea of freedom as construed in some quarters of the world, and slavery as well, can occupy, can be projected on a single building. Now, as I go to that, I want to conduct a particular test experiment with these two buildings here. Notice that these two buildings look similar. There's a way that you can see that they both ascend, the front facades ascend to a top. You see that, and I wonder if one can tell the functions of both of these buildings. Some of you may have gone to this particular building, so this building may look familiar, but I wonder how many people have gone to this building. And more importantly, what are these buildings? Well, one of them is a church, the Church of the Gesù in Rome, that was completed in 1580. But this one, interesting enough, is a mosque. And notice that this was built arguably about almost 400 years later. Notice that these two buildings really encapsulate two different religions. Islam and Christianity. Nevertheless, they share certain formal properties. They share an elaborate front facade, for instance. They share a sense of symmetry. There's a sense of symmetry here where this side balances this side. They are exactly the same. Also here, this part of the facade balances this part. There's a sense of this being similar to this. So that's what I mean by symmetry. You see this here as well. But nevertheless, they portray, in a sense, two different religions so the way what I meant earlier about how a building can be ambiguous enough that it can encapsulate two different meanings is part of what I will explore. How this became a mosque, how these two buildings share a similar architectural formal language is part of what I'm going to explore in this lecture. Now, going forward, as I talk about this lecture, I want to start with a sad story of a particular building in Lagos, Nigeria, more about Lagos as we go on. But this particular building here was built in 1855 by Afro-Brazilians who migrated from Brazil to Southwest Nigeria, which was colonial Nigeria, Southwest colonial Nigeria, as you saw in the title of my lecture. Sadly, this building was unceremoniously demolished in 2016 to a huge outcry from the public. There was an architectural competition that ensued to rebuild the structure. Notice, it was built in 1855 and sadly it was demolished in 2016. There was an architectural competition. It yielded no results. I was actually supposed to be on the jury, part of the jury for the competition, but I bring this up to talk about and to introduce my subject, to talk about an era where thousands upon thousands of Afro-Brazilians boarded ships from southwest and from northeastern Brazil rather to southwest Nigeria, and they brought architectural skills with them. They memorized the Baroque architecture that they saw in Brazil, and they created their own Baroque in southwest Nigeria. And this particular building was one of those buildings. Notice a blow up of the detail here. There's a way that this building, Casa da Fernandes, it was owned by a former slave known as Fernandes. Again, he was an Afro-Brazilian who migrated from Brazil to southwest Nigeria. Notice how Fernandes appropriates sculptural and architectural forms from classical architecture, Western architecture, to create his own vision of what an Afro-Brazilian architecture could be. Again, this brings up the fore of how, in his own person, he was a former slave who appropriated architectural languages that were known that were associated with Portuguese architecture and the Portuguese occupation of Brazil. This kind of sculptural tradition is more akin with classical sculpture in Greece and Rome. This Afro-Brazilian, this former slave who had migrated, who was an immigrant into Lagos, appropriated this language that was associated with something else before, to project his own status as somebody who was now free. And so architecture formally portrayed something, and then it was appropriated by somebody who had just gotten his freedom and who wanted to use it to serve his own purposes. So again, you see slavery and freedom just encoded in this architecture. To give us a sense of geography of where we are going to be in this lecture, when I mean Lagos, I am talking about this part of West Africa. Lagos, and you can see it right here, a blow up is right here. Lagos used to be the capital of Nigeria. Nigeria is very significant in Africa. Why? Because it has the largest population in Africa. Just to throw out a trivial fact, 1 out of 5 Africans is a Nigerian. I repeat, 1 out of 5 Africans is a Nigerian. The British colonized Lagos in 1861, as you can see right here. So Lagos became the Lagos colony. And then Nigeria was delineated in its current shape in the first decade of the 20th century, in the early 1900s. And to repeat what I said before, there were thousands upon thousands. There were over arguably 8,000 former slaves who left Brazil in the 19th century, so between the years 1830 and 1900, and they settled in the Bight of Benin. And the Bight of the Benin is this region. It's the shore that, really borders four countries, the equivalent of four countries today: Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria. And so again, about 8,000 Afro-Brazilians, former slaves, they were a heterogeneous group. They migrated from northeastern Brazil to southwest Nigeria that you see right here. And so this introduces the Atlantic slave trade, and hence this is the reason why this particular image is right here, just to give you a sense of the geography of the Atlantic slave trade and how, as we are going to see in the lecture, this impacts the architecture that I will be talking about. In other words, putting it differently, the architecture that I'm showing that embodies both slavery and freedom is a slice into the history of the Atlantic slave trade route. And for this lecture today, we're going to focus on this particular route. Out of the many routes you see in this picture, we're going to look at the route between northeastern Brazil, primarily Salvador, and southwest Nigeria. The route through which architectural ideas embodying slavery and freedom traveled. Speaking of travel, this is a picture from the year 1900 where there were former slaves who were on a ship en route to Lagos from Salvador. To repeat what I said earlier, between 1830 and 1900, there were thousands, about 8,000 Afro-Brazilians like these who boarded ships and moved from Salvador to Lagos. It begs the question, why did they migrate? Why was the migration so much over a 70-year period? Well, one of the reasons why is that there were as many as 9 anti-slavery uprisings in a place like Salvador, and as a result, instigators were either expelled, or people like these people you see right here felt that their position, their safety in Salvador was not secure. And they started getting passports. If there was good weather, a journey from Salvador to Lagos took 26 days by ship. If the weather wasn't good and if they survived, it could take several months. And as these people migrated, they built religious architecture, funerary architecture, as well as residential architecture. I repeat, religious architecture, funerary architecture, tombstone architecture, in other words, but also residential architecture. And the idea is that some of the former slaves were people who had acquired construction skills as slave labor in northeastern Brazil. They had, again, to repeat myself, they had memorized the Baroque that was really popularized by the Portuguese in northeastern Brazil. Of course, the Baroque started in Italy, but remember that the Baroque was a global architectural language that flowed into European countries, including Portugal. When the Portuguese colonized Brazil, they brought Baroque architecture to Brazil. So there's a way that this story that I am telling, this lecture is also a story of the global Baroque. And notice here particularly how this is a tombstone structure in a Muslim cemetery in Lagos, but it looks like a Baroque tower that you would see in Italy and in other parts of Europe. So again, just to encapsulate this part of the lecture, these were former slaves that you see right here, some of whom had construction skills and who, as they migrated, as they fled Brazil and settled in southwest Nigeria, they brought architectural skills with them that they used in the new environment in colonial Lagos. And so this is the building I began with in my virtual background, and it's to this building we will turn to now. Notice that it is the same building right here, but this is a picture that dates from 1894 when the structure was built. And the mosque is called the Shita Bey Mosque, after the founder, Mohammed Shita Bey. And in terms of its material properties, you may wonder, what was this building made out of? This building was made out of brick, as a result, and including some other materials that you can see. You can see corrugated zinc right here. But again, this is a structure, it's a mosque. And notice that this particular building right here really speaks to the sense of what Lagos was in 1894. The Lagos colony, remember I told you that Lagos was a British colony, but it was an incredibly cosmopolitan city. There were European residents, there were Germans, of course there were the British colonizers who were there, but there were also immigrants coming in from other parts of West Africa. There were people coming in from Brazil. By this time in 1894, there were about already 4,000 Afro-Brazilians, former slaves living in the city. And that sense of cosmopolitanism is what you also see in the architectural language, because this architecture draws from a variety of sources. You can see classical architecture in terms of these openings right here, known in Latin as the oculi. You can see pinnacles here that one would associate with Gothic architecture. So in other words, this architecture right here is a laboratory of different smiles, a cosmopolitanism, if you will, styles coming together to, in many ways, evincing both slavery, that is, the fact that Afro-Brazilians built this structure, and yes, Afro-Brazilians did build this structure. So it evinces their past as former slaves getting architectural skills through slavery, but it also speaks to the freedom that they acquired and the opportunity and the ability to construct a building like this in colonial Lagos. As slaves in Brazil, the point needs to be stressed, they could not have built this structure. To give you a sense of the financier, Mohammed Shita Bey, this is the only picture, well, this is one of two pictures we have of him. The second picture is also in this lecture. He died a year after the structure was erected. A comment on Bey. Bey was a Turkish title that was given to him because he was financed the structure, and more about that later. But I wanted to give you a sense. This is a group picture. This is the only other picture of Bey that we see, and this was around the time that the mosque was erected, and this is a group picture of various dignitaries who attended the opening ceremony of the mosque. This is the King of Lagos. Time will not permit me to go through just all of the people, but I want to call your attention to Edward Blyden, a Trinidadian Pan-Africanist who is known in African-American studies, who also attended the ceremony of the opening of this mosque. Now, again, this is the same, it's the same mosque. This picture was taken in 1894, like I said. This structure right here, not a structure, this picture right here was taken in the 1970s. So these three pictures here, this is a blow up of this. These tend to be more recent pictures. But just to give you a sense of the materiality, not only was brick used in the upper part of the structure, stone was used here. You see mosaic tiles here that harken back to mosaic tiles on Brazilian homes in Brazil. So again, there's this idea that this building really is a laboratory. It hints at the past of Brazil, the past that was full of slavery, but it also speaks to the fact that these former slaves who built the structure built it in a land of freedom where they could turn their lives around. Just to give you a sense, so as you know, this is a blow up of this particular area. And this just to give you another sense of this just beautiful structure. I talked about a Turkish element in the name of Muhammad Shita Bey. There was a Turkish connection to this building. Notice this person, he was the emperor of Constantinople, Sultan Abdul Hamid II. When he got word of the fact that this structure was being built, he sent his British Isle advisor, a Victorian Muslim, William Henry Abdullah Quilliam, to award Shita Bey, the financier, a Turkish title and to deliver a speech on behalf of the Sultan. This is a picture taken from 2011. Very sadly, the building is not in a good state. This picture was taken in the 1970s. This was taken in 2011, just to give you a sense of the present state of the building. But let us go inside, because building is not just about, architecture in general is not just about the exterior, but it's also about the interior. And this is really sort of the interior. This is the mihrab that orients Muslims towards Mecca when they pray. And the mihrab is in every single mosque. And here we see it right here. If you were to go into the building, the mihrab would be right here. And I actually have a section. A section is a drawing used, it's part of the toolkit of an architect to really give a sense of the interior of a building. So it's either called an interior or a section. And so this mihrab that you see right here is what you see right here. Just going on to give you more aspects of the interior. Let me go back a little bit. This building has what is called a barrel vault right here. It's up above right here. And that's what you see, this vault, this curvature is what you see right here. You see the embossment, the top of the curvature right here. And notice that the tile work I talked about on the exterior, you also find that in the interior as well. And so again, this building evinces this idea of slavery and freedom, an architecture of opposites, where people, former slaves, migrated from Brazil to Southwest colonial Nigeria and really created an architecture that spoke to the past, but also spoke to the future as well. And so this building embodied those opposites. That is the end of my lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to the prospect of teaching buildings like this in classes that you might take. Have a wonderful day.